Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. And I'm the interviewer.
Yeah. And what is it you wanted to talk about today? And why? Why would you want to talk about it?
I want to talk about makeup sex is a lie. That is the topic of conversation. And I wanted to talk about this because makeup sex has been around since I was a kid. It's like we talk about all these things, abuse-free life. We talk about intentional interviews. We talk about intentional debriefings. But I didn't have any idea of any of that stuff. But what I did know about was makeup sex. And makeup sex is what happens when you get in a fight and then you have sex after. And it's really great sex because the fight made you all emotional and got you all worked up. And then you got to come together, if you were lucky, and have this like amazing makeup sex. And then that like kind of healed everything. Mm-hmm. And that was like kind of taught, that was kind of like, oh, that's how relationships work. You're in a relationship with someone, you have an argument. Next thing you know, you're having sex. It's really great. And it's something to look forward to, kind of like it becomes this thing where it's like, oh, well, we get the fight, that's fine. But then the makeup sex is going to really make it all better. So it's like kind of like got ingrained in my head, and then getting into relationships and then being like, we had a fight, get to have sex. And I had a little bit, but never that much. And sometimes I would get in a fight in my last relationship, but we wouldn't have it. And then I'd be like, I'm missing out on something. And so I just, and I've also heard, and people are still talking about this. People still talk about the makeup sex. And it's like this whole thing, ooh, makeup, like, it's like, they like it. They're excited about it. And I'm just like, and now after talking to you, you've kind of destroyed the idea of it in my head.
It's part of my mission in life is to destroy fun things.
Yes. So makeup sex now seems to me to be this pattern that people are stuck in, and this thing that they learned, and that's kind of become a universal thing. Like everyone knows, if you ask them makeup sex, they would know what that means more than if you said an intentional interview. They would know that more than fair fighting.
Oh, yeah.
So absolutely. All the concepts that we know are shadowed by makeup sex, which I see as an unhealthy pattern of behavior that is kind of played out again and again and again. And it kind of doesn't necessarily lead to actually what you're trying to do, which is create like an intimate relationship where the sex is always good. Mm-hmm. So
I made a face while you were talking because I had to realize I haven't really taken it seriously. And because in my own mind, I've just been rather dismissive of it, and I think you're quite right to point out that people may not know a lot about relationships, but the people who seem to know the least do know about makeup sex.
Yeah.
And that's sort of an aspirin for a headache kind of remedy. Mm-hmm. For we don't feel close, let's have some makeup sex.
Yeah.
And they have a coital renewal of their vows. Mm-hmm. And now we have this feeling of feeling close again.
Yes.
And I appreciate sex for its ability to bypass a lot of the cognitive distancing couples do. I think it's a wonderful way of reaffirming I love this person and I care about them and they care about me. And, the tenderness of, being in the bedroom together, I think does all of that. I think that's great. But using it the way that you're talking about, I can see how it becomes a bit of a drug and a go-to. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk for a minute about how some of this stuff starts. And I think to get not to be too sciencey, but there is a phenomenon of misplaced cortical arousal where I feel very aroused and then I erroneously label it as love, for example. Like you do a very dangerous or highly adventurous activity, like going down the Colorado River when the water's high and it's full of thrills and chills and everybody's getting drenched, and you pull over at the side for, starting the fire for dinner that night at the end of the day. And all of a sudden you're really noticing, the other people and how attractive they are from your raft or from your group. And that's falling in love in those circumstances where we're sharing danger or we're sharing intense emotional experiences is, I think, best described as misplaced cortical arousal. Because I really don't know that person, do I? I don't know them any better. It's not as though we were on a date. We were just riding the river and risking our lives going through this experience. But we weren't really doing any of the legwork that would help us to have become more informed regarding each other, much less having a foundation for love. So that's kind of what happens. And I think it's really easy to look at an argument followed by really a very high level of physicality in the bedroom, not just sex, but kind of like pounding the sadness out of each other kind of sex. That, I think, is the mirror image toward the end of a relationship of misplaced cortical arousal, where, this is like a much less inhibited form of sex. We're just going for it. There's hair pulling and butts are getting slapped and fingernails are scratching on each other's skin. And then all of a sudden, wow, that was really exciting. And that was really great. We should be together, which is the erroneous conclusion from makeup sex, is that therefore, because we had a really fun time in the bedroom, therefore we should remain a couple. And I'm not so sure that would be the proper foundation for a happily ever after kind of relationship. And some couples, like it so much, it's sort of like a drug addict where they're doing it over and over and over again and having more and more frequent arguments because it feels so great to bounce back from the F-bombs and I hate you and you're a terrible person and all the, colorful ways we say all those things to, and now we're having sex. Because there's at least an illusion of affirmation and approval and acceptance. This illusion of what we might call the vitamin A's of romance. I think that it really creates a false impression that, well, we really are a good couple. We really are quite magical together. When no, you just had makeup sex because you were highly aroused, you were angry and resentful of this other person, and you decided to have sex in such a way while thinking of his brother or her sister or, whatever it is you're thinking about. You're not really thinking about, I just really love this person, or this is really just such a great part of our relationship. It's makeup sex. And I see why it exists. I think personally, I think if people have makeup sex, they should enjoy it. I wouldn't say don't enjoy it. But the mistake would be concluding, therefore, we should be a good couple or we should stay together.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, it just becomes like a cycle. And if you're not aware of that cycle, you're just going to be playing that out indefinitely. And maybe, like you said, it becomes more and more repetitive. So then it's like, rather than having it once every 6 months, maybe it's once every 3 months, then it's once every 2 months, and it's once every month. And you're just like having these big blowouts followed by these big sexual escapades. And that's where I think it's like the lie of it, like the illusion that you're saying. It's like you could have the same level of intensity of sex, I think, coming from a place of love and real connection if you were actually communicating properly and having fair fighting and doing that sort of stuff. At least that's what I think. Maybe sometimes I think people don't think that that's possible. And I think that's why maybe it exists.
Well, I tend to agree with you. And I think part of what's wonderful about makeup sex for those who enjoy it regularly is the uninhibited nature of the sexual intercourse. And why is it so uninhibited now? Well, because the other person is so angry with me, they really don't give a flying F why I feel the way I do, or what I'm feeling about them, or what my stand is on the national debt and taxes, or whatever it was that got us all riled up in the first place. They're just really mad at us, and they just don't care anymore what we think. And I think courage is always the key that unlocks the door to risk taking, and for some of those of us who are men, at least, to really getting in touch with our true masculine nature. I think courage is really great, and anger can be kind of the launching pad for obtaining more courage.
Yeah.
But we need courage 24/7. We need courage even when I'm not angry with my mate. We need courage even when it comes to those quiet conversations where my sharing my feelings, even when they're not particularly welcome, that's really an important part of it. And we need the courage to be able to do that. And so finding another, if the only launching pad for my courage is anger, well, then I think we all are going to miss out. And that's, so having courage, I would love to have my mate feel relaxed and comfortable enough with her body, with my body, with us together, that she could be uninhibited and really be herself. But I don't want to have to depend on creating some kind of a drama preceded by "I hate you, you're such a loser." We're going back and forth like that to get to that place of courage. And so I would argue, as boring as it might sound to some people, having an abuse-free relationship where we both feel safe is an alternate way to get to the same place. Oh, and also a more sustainable way to get to the same place.
Yeah. Because if you had that, if you had an abuse-free life and you were able to argue, if you really were like, oh, I like that scenario when you scream and yell at me, and then you scream and yell at me back, and we get like really crazy, and then we have sex. It's like, can't you just get to that? Like, can't you have the same thing?
Right.
And because I know with improv, you tap into emotions, and they're real emotions. I mean, they're not like, if you feel anger and you express it, you could get into that mode, but you're doing it from a sense of play and a sense of, in a level of awareness that isn't inducing trauma onto the other people.
Right. And where you have your emotion of anger, let's say, and your outburst on the stage, but it doesn't have you. It's not like it's driving you to say horrible things you can never take back. It's all for play, as you say. It's all make-believe, the way children make believe they just shot somebody. They know they didn't shoot somebody, playing cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians. Nobody really is getting shot. And they know they didn't really die when they put their hand to their chest and they fell over backwards. They know that they didn't die, but it's still very enjoyable play. And that's what you get out of improv. But for people to have to actually set up a psychodrama where they are so full of those actual feelings in order to have the greatest sex of their marriage.
Yeah.
That's kind of a, to call it unsustainable is probably underselling my idea, because I think and to call it horrible just sounds judgmental, right? But at the end of the day, it just seems like it's incredibly stupid, because there are all these other smarter ways of doing it that are far more sustainable and that last beyond the bedroom into our conversations in the living room or out on a date, where we're talking and being open and vulnerable with each other, where we don't have to get angry to have courage. And that's it. I think for me, am I encouraging my mate to have courage rather than beating her down? And is she doing the same with me so that we can take ever greater risks with one another? Well, I really like it when you do this, or to tell you the truth, I really never liked it when you put on the clown costume, in the bedroom. It really doesn't work for me. And then just, what? I thought you liked that. No, not so much. Instead of needing to, be insulting or abusive outside of the bedroom.
Yeah. So the idea is like you could have this healthy relationship by living abuse free, by being vulnerable, by not being led by your anger, by having the courage instead to confront your partner, to have these conversations about sex or sexuality. And by doing all this work, like to me, it seems like you could then get to that level of makeup sex that people are so loving. You could get there. And I think you could also surpass it.
Well, oh yeah, I think you can definitely surpass it because it's far more valuable, easily maintained throughout the day, right? So I really do believe that to get to heightened sense of emotional awareness, it's not just, well, we want things to be so safe that, well, you're just going to fall asleep at any minute. To feel safe enough gives me room to take additional risks.
Yes.
So that I can say, the hard thing, like, when you talk about your politics, I just get so uncomfortable. And I sometimes feel embarrassed by the stance that you take. What? I had no idea you felt that way. And those are not abusive words, but they're very risky, because if the other person is one side of the political spectrum, like say a progressive, and the other one is a reactionary, it's really easy to enter into the zeitgeist of our time and just be angry at each other instead of really sharing how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
Instead of shouting, you're wrong. And, well, what about his blah, blah, blah? And, where we're dueling with angry ideas, but instead to just talk about feelings, it's highly, I would say highly vulnerable. And so there is a sense of risk. And the sex after that gets us to the same place as makeup sex, except, we didn't have to truncate the relationship temporarily to get there.
Yeah.
We just had to take a risk as a human individual to get there.
Yeah. And if you're truncating that relationship again and again and again, it's not going to be sustainable, I would imagine. And it's also going to kind of block the intimacy. It's like, because I feel like if you're doing that again and again, intimacy is kind of being blocked to a certain level. But if you're going the healthy route, the intimacy is going deeper and deeper and deeper. So then the sex continues to evolve. Like the makeup sex could eventually become boring, I think, after
absolutely.
a certain amount of time, because it's like it wears off, but it's like it has a lifespan that's not indefinite, whereas the healthy route has it's infinite.
It is infinite, and it goes on forever, because getting to know another human being goes on forever. There's no end to our own personal growth and the things that we never were willing to share before, but now we are willing to share, including my new ideas about the way the world works or should work. And so we find ourselves growing toward intimacy, and the opposite, as you pointed out, truncating a relationship. Well, fine, then it's over between us. Well, fine, I don't care. Get your shit and get out. And we're yelling back and forth, and then we fall into each other's arms, and we're kissing, and then we have sex. Well, what we're doing is systematically desensitizing ourselves to breaking up, to truncating the relationship permanently, and terminating all intimacy. So you have to get closer and closer to the edge by getting more and more abusive to get to the same level of rush and excitement. And that's kind of dumb because it doesn't really take us in the right direction at all. It's like the heroin addict who needs more heroin each time to achieve the same level of high, and he's chasing this high for the rest of his time spent in his addiction. And for the person or persons who really enjoy the makeup sex, and that feeling of closeness, I would say, is really illusory, And it can be obtained virtually anytime we have sex with anybody we like, because again, you can't have sex without communicating some level of affirmation, approval, and acceptance in the middle of all that affection that you're sharing. Mm-hmm. So it feels like love, even if it's not. Mm-hmm. But just like heroin feels like euphoria, but it only creates a feeling of euphoria. It isn't actual euphoria.
Yeah.
So when we are able to take the risks that may upset the other person or not, but are really scary for us, even if the other person is fine with it, to have the other person listen to us, and then they share maybe how they feel about a certain related topic that, as the day unfolded, and then the two of us have each taken risks. Well, the sex after that is really celebratory. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's still healing, but it's truly of a far more positive nature, and it's just as exciting, just as fun as makeup sex, but far more sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like you said too, that chase, like you're chasing, it's like even getting that chase mindset, I think it can be detrimental to people. Like I know for myself, like if I get in that kind of headspace of chasing a person or a job or a specific feeling, that for me, that kind of gets me anxious.
Right.
And then when you're not chasing that thing, you could relax into it. And I think that's what we talk about too. Like when you fully enter into an intimate relationship that is healthy, you kind of relax into it by being your full authentic self. And that is so much more enjoyable. And I think like healthy, it feels better for the body. It feels better for both people involved. And
it's an acquired taste, I think, because we all try to put our best face on ourselves when we are in a new relationship. We always want to appear as positive as possible in the eyes of the other person. But then when she's inviting me to my 10th craft fair, and I hated the first one, and by the 10th one, I'm ready to scream. And I finally summoned the courage to say, I've never really told you, but I just don't like craft fairs.
What?
And she says, what? I always thought you did. Well, you thought that because I lied to you, 10 times. But I really don't want to do that anymore. And I'm scared that you won't like me if I don't like this thing that matters so much to you. And it might be her talking about hunting or fishing or sports or whatever it is he likes that she doesn't like. It could be about politics. It could be about religion, because people change their mind about politics and religion. And and when we change, we often keep the change private to ourselves, confidential within our own mind. And taking the risk of exposing ourselves to the other person does risk some level of judgment and possible rejection. And to get to a point where, no, I have confidence they won't reject me, it's just still a little scary, because this is not how I was raised to be this honest, to be this open. I've never done this with anybody else. And so, especially for my clients who are very confrontation avoidant, for them, any confrontation with truth is to be avoided for the most part. And like I say, it's an acquired taste. And I think it's something every adult needs, but not randomly in every situation, but maybe certainly we could say within the family life.
Yeah.
And modeling that for kids, if we have kids, and if we if we do have a stake in America, as opposed to those people who have no kids, because that's the new thing going around from one political party, that I think it's just hard to be honest. And that's why I think we value honesty so much, is we recognize that it's challenging. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it all the time.
Why is it so hard for people?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier about the risk of rejection.
Oh, the risk.
Yeah, there's this.
But we've talked about rejection and said, once you get over that and you get comfortable with it, then you could become more yourself. And if somebody doesn't accept you for who you are, it's like, all right, I don't need to prove myself to somebody.
But it's still risky, like because the risks get bigger and bigger, right? You get, let's say you met her and the two of you fell in love and you've had a great first 5 years. You even got married during that time. Mm-hmm. And then you want to share some new truth about yourself, not new to you maybe, but new to her. That, you know, and the examples that come to my mind are somewhat extreme, but say that you really do like porn, or you really do like cross-dressing, or you really do like, you know, fill in the blank, or you do have fantasies about threesomes. And you know that she's already told you, I would just feel so angry with somebody who told me that.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Yeah. And so now it's like, wow, this is really going to be kind of challenging, right? Mm-hmm. And then how would you do that? How do you make that risk? And that's probably a whole nother podcast, right? But to be able to say, I have something I want to talk about, but I'm afraid to talk about it because I'm afraid you'll judge me and reject me, or I'm afraid you'll get mad. And well, what is it? Well, that's just it. I'm afraid of taking that risk. But you've already told me you've got that thing. Yeah, I'm just kind of breaking in my brain to the idea that maybe someday I'll share it with you. I'm not sure that today's the day. And because what I don't want to see all of us normalize is I've got to get so angry on a scale of 1 to 10. I've got to get to a 9 or a 10 to where I'm just ready to scream before I make my disclosure.
Yeah.
And instead, you know, which would lead possibly to make up sex, but also possibly to get out of this house. I never want to see you again.
Yeah.
So to be able to say it when my discomfort level is or my irritation level is at a 1 or a 2, that's a new lifestyle. And that takes a while to acclimate to that and to develop a taste for that. And to be comfortable with who we are. That isn't so easy.
Yeah.
And I think people don't see too many role models of that, you know, in the media or in real life.
But isn't that kind of what we're pitching here, to be as honest as possible in like your dating life, and to be able to hold the relationship loosely and be your authentic self? And if they do reject you, then it's okay. Because it's like,
well, let's not get over our skis on this. I mean, maybe it would be better to have some sex first before you get the rejection.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, like you don't want to, like, you don't drop everything
on a first date.
On a first date, like we've talked about before, where sometimes some guys will be like, here's a list of all the horrible things about me. Do you still want to have sex with me? Sort of thing.
Yeah. Or do you still want to go out with me?
Still want to go out with me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm HIV positive, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so do you feel, is it okay if we have sex now? And I think I think it takes more grace than that. It's making these disclosures and developing intimacy at the end of the day is a specific social skill. And we could even call it an intimacy skill, because it's at that extreme end of the continuum where only the highly skilled people get to do that. And to say, well, I want to share something with you, but I don't know if I have the skills to do it in a way that would work for us, especially me. And well, what is it? Well, I just don't want to get into it right now. I just don't even know how to begin doing it. Well, that would be a great thing to bring to a therapy session, and to do some role plays with your therapist one-on-one. But it would also be, I think, a great thing to share with a friend who already knows, or who definitely won't judge you, and then just to say, I just don't know how to bring this up with them, referring to your marriage, and to figure it out. Now, I think that for every problem there is a solution. There is a way to say my truth, but it's so hard sometimes to find the way that makes sense. And it is simultaneously true that there are people out there, including some of us in our partnerships, there are people who are just going to be judgmental and reject us. If she or he admits to having fantasies of a threesome, for example, or really wants to talk about polyamory, or really, wants to do something that scares the other person to an extreme. You can't like make that safe from unsafe. There are things we can do to make it less unsafe or safer, but there always are going to be challenges there.
Yeah. But isn't it good to have those disclosures like when it does come up? Because if it is holding the person back that much, or like, oh, I gotta have threesomes. It's my destiny. It's my life. I need to do this now. And then it's like, if
I don't do it now, I'll never do it.
Yeah. And then if you bring it up to your partner and you have a real discussion about it, and they're like, no, that's not something I'm interested in, then you could make the decision to probably end the relationship, I would imagine. So
you might, or maybe the other person might just simply respectfully hear you out, nod their head, whether it's him or her. They nod their head and they say, yeah, I can see that you're pretty into it. And you're waiting. So what do you think? Well, I'm glad to hear you out. You give me a lot to think about. Now, as immediately disappointing as that might be, because they're not saying, I think that sounds great. Let's buy a Porsche. I don't care if we have retirement money or not. Let's just buy one of those.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to be able to share, and nobody has to make a new decision.
So yeah, that's a good thing.
Nobody has to decide yes or no on threesomes or polyamory or buying a new Porsche or doing whatever it is they're talking about doing. Nobody has to decide anything. Nobody has to do anything new. The big thing, I think, for us as partners, if we really take pride in being good partners, part of our job description is to really be there for our partner when they're sharing something of a deep, personal, intimate nature. And to simply hear them out. But we're not required to salute the flag as it goes up, the flag of polyamory, for example, or the flag of Porsche. We're not required to change our values. We're not required to change our way of thinking about the universe, but we are required to be there.
Yeah.
And for me, that would be far more important than having a threesome.
Just having the person be there.
Absolutely.
Because then that threesome could then disappear from the person's mind.
To me, just knowing the depth of partnership is so much more satisfying than virtually any sexual fantasy that it has merely titillating elements to it. So titillation has its own rewards, and I can appreciate titillation as much as the next person, but intimacy is the trump card. Somebody who embraces me emotionally, accepts me for who I am, who understands that I have these crazy thoughts about buying a Porsche or having a threesome, but doesn't feel compelled to, give in to that or to say, yes, let's make that happen. That's okay too. Yeah. And the intimacy is priceless.
So getting back to the makeup sex, I think about our episode we did on God's Playground for Grownups, and I was thinking them kind of in comparison to one another. So as far as like teaching, like I'm trying to think like here, I was saying in the beginning how makeup sex was in my mind from a pretty young age, fairly young age. I think it was even in like movies and things like that.
Sure.
But then what if I think the better way of looking at it, it's like you don't want to strive towards makeup sex. You want to strive towards God's playground for grownups,
where it can be playful and enjoyable and fun, and the alternate point of view would be, oh no, it's not God's playground for grownups. The bedroom is a very serious affair where serious business gets transacted, and your partner approaches you and says, okay, let's do this. And we go off to have sex. Well, that doesn't sound enjoyable at all. But if my partner had to like get me in the mood by slapping me across the face and calling me a bunch of names, it's like, okay, I'm ready for some real hardcore makeup sex. Let's do this. No, That for me is not an aphrodisiac.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, when you're tense with the hostility in a relationship and you're deeply unhappy, at that moment for somebody to break the glass on the fire alarm of intimacy and say, yeah, I just want to go to bed with you right now, suddenly it feels like relief, but it isn't relief, except it's relief from the emergency that immediately preceded it. But it isn't, it's that misplaced cortical arousal that it would be crazy to think, oh, and now we have the marriage or the relationship I've always wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the sex was great in terms of what athleticism, aggressiveness, and lack of inhibition, it wasn't great in terms of love, caring, or true vulnerability.
Yeah. And I think that God's Playground for Grownups too, where it's a place where it's just, there's those infinite possibilities where anything can be played out. You could play out a really fun time. You could play out a darker time. You could play with the light and the dark of everything that is possible within the human capacity.
Yeah. And
in a way that's protected for both people, like feels safe for both people, but also has wherever you want to go with it.
Well, during those occasions or, the after sex moments, so-called pillow talk, where we're talking for a minute before passing out, falling asleep, we much, I never told you, but I really don't want to go to any more craft fairs. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes that too establishes that breakthrough in the inhibitions. So I just think makeup sex is really for adrenaline junkies who've never figured out how to do real intimacy.
And then how would you suggest, so say someone is in that cycle of that, or they're listening to that and they're like, thanks, Steve, and other guy. It's like, this is my relationship. Yeah, just ruined my life. Like, what if they are like hearing this and they resonate with it and they're like, oh, how do I get out of this?
Now what do I do?
So what would you
say? If they really agree, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, if they and they don't have to.
Yeah, you can't unhear that. Mm-hmm. I guess you could keep drinking and maybe forget the podcast, but if it resonates with someone and they know they're not there in their marriage, I think personally sharing the idea that we've talked about misplaced cortical arousal, that it's really not intimate, that it's not even close to what you're trying to build in your life, and it's not sustainable. Would you be open to doing something different? And sometimes the answer is going to be yes, and sometimes the answer is going to be, huh? I don't know what you're talking about. Because there are people out there who just either willfully are ignorant or are just incapable of seeing the value of intimacy, perhaps today, maybe just for today, as they say in AA. But how many years would you want to wait for them to come around?
Yeah.
That would be my question. So for me, yeah, if I figured it out and my mate wasn't, even if my mate said yes, she was down for that change, but was never capable of executing it, even if we went to therapy and talked about thoroughly and it was well understood by both, I would have to lovingly accept her as she is and just as lovingly let go, detach, and move on with my life.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say that you would you say it would start with the abuse-free life and fair fighting, maybe a combination of those two?
Well, I don't see how you can ever, I don't know if I say this enough, but if you don't have an abuse-free relationship, you can never get to a good relationship. The abuse-free relationship is a sine qua non, without which not. If you two of you can't live safely under one roof together, if you can't safely go to sleep at night knowing you're going to be okay, I don't mean feeling like you will probably be okay, but knowing that you're going to be okay, then it's impossible to get to a truly good relationship and to feel safe enough to make certain disclosures. because if abuse remains an option,
Yeah.
that's one of the potential consequences.
Mm.
So yeah, everything starts with that, right?
Mm.
I mean, not me as a single man. Obviously, as a single man living alone, I have an abuse-free home, and I'm dating, but I'm doing an intentional interview, or one after the other as I get to know someone, and I'm really learning about her, and that we're both interested in having an abuse-free life. And as time goes on, I find that she's actually even capable of it, and that's wonderful and fantastic, and the relationship is going forward. But so often we're so consumed with our own emotional neediness that we really refuse to read the handwriting on the wall, and we refuse to step away, even when I've had, I don't know how many clients, male clients that is, who've been slapped, punched, and hit in one way or another by a girlfriend, broken up, only to get back together with her at the earliest possible opportunity. And that's clearly the abuse-free life is not foremost in their mind, either his or hers.
But the makeup sex must be really good.
And you know, it's funny, even in that, makeup sex is not great under those circumstances. I can tell you from experience, as they've described it to me, they often don't have sex, or they'll have sex once and then limp along for months afterwards.
Yeah.
And the reason is they don't feel safe to be sharing the same space with each other. Mm-hmm. It's just that one of them, at least, is hoping against hope that it's all going to somehow work out, and someday I will be loved the way I want to be loved.
Yeah. So it starts with the abuse-free life, and that's the sine qua non, as you said.
Yeah, the foundation of everything. If you don't build a foundation for your house, you can't have a stable house.
Yeah.
So that has to be a huge part of the foundation.
And then I would think the next one would be like learning how to fight fair.
Absolutely, because you got to, like Jada Pinkett Smith, in that quote I read from her autobiography, you have to learn how to be present even when you're disagreeing with each other. How can you really even know who I am if I'm not telling you when I disagree with you and when I feel upset with you? That would mean you don't know me at all.
Yeah. And then from there, it's then learning about intimacy, I would think. Like learning.
Yeah, experiencing that, feeling, okay, it's safe. We're not going to be abusive. We're going to share these deeper parts of ourselves. And then as the freaking months go by and the years go by, we get closer and closer and closer until you get to a point, frankly, where you realize, okay, there is nothing stopping me from getting married. I have no more fears at that point, that I can justify for not getting married. And not that you have to get married to do this, because that's not what I'm pushing here, but those fears go away. And also, I have new fears now. Fears that, my partner might pass before I'm ready to let go. And if he or she dies, then I really can't even imagine replacing them, because we've come together so far on this journey that I can't imagine there's another person out there in the universe who would want to get on that same journey with me. And there may very well be, but it's really a lot of work, and it's hard to imagine like starting over once you've gone so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really challenging to do that.
All right. So anything else that you could say about people to get them out of this makeup sex? Would you say it is something people should let it go?
Makeup sex? I mean, I wouldn't turn it down if my wife was upset with me today and she wanted to have makeup sex of some sort. But that's just really hard for me to even imagine, because intimacy forestalls makeup sex. See, makeup sex isn't really about making up at all. It's kind of a misnomer, isn't it? It's really about a temporary truce while we all sit down and take care of our physical needs.
Yeah.
So, and my wife and I often have very passionate disagreements with one another, but it's never abusive.
Yeah.
So if it's never abusive, that means like she's never She's never lost her consciousness that there's an abiding love for me in her heart, and that is mutual. I feel exactly the same way. So I may really disagree about, what to do with the children or how to handle the money or what we're doing, with our gift giving and politically in terms of donations. But that doesn't mean there's not even the least little hitch in our going forward with our love life.
Yeah. All right. Well, take what you want from that conversation. Hopefully you got something out of it.
Take it all.
Take it all. And to wrap up, we have a listener question. So if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is as follows. Hi, Steve. After 30 years of marriage, unfortunately, divorce is the final option. Should I tell our university-age kids the reason is their father's numerous affairs? I fear that they will blame me since I am initiating the divorce. I don't want to be the bad guy when I did everything I could to save our marriage, including forgiving him for many affairs and keeping it a secret from everyone. I think my husband should step up and tell our kids the truth, but he refuses. What is the most ethical way to handle this?
Yeah, it's really different, isn't it, when we have adult age children versus underage children? Because I think with underage children, clearly that isn't necessary, even if they do mistakenly and childishly blame mom. But what about my adult children mistakenly and childishly blaming anybody? Do we have to find out who the villain is and who is the victim? I think in that morality play, we go backwards in time to a time when divorce is a moral sin instead of a remedy for a human problem. So if we can think of divorce for our parents or when we're talking to our children, whatever side of the equation we're on, it's a remedy for some very painful problem that otherwise no two people wouldn't even be considering this. And I think, background-wise, rare is the child who doesn't understand what their parents have been up to in the last 20 years. If you're in college and you already know your parents that long, you have some idea about what's going on and what's not going on. And you may be mistaken on some of the details, but you got a general sense of it. My thought is it's really not necessary to process this with your children because unless they've gotten to that point where they are now adult equals to yourself. But when she calls them her children, she's not calling them her offspring or her adult offspring who've moved on with their life and now they're her best friends, or she's really close to one of them in particular as a friend. And sometimes that does happen. But in this situation, I just think it's a personal issue for this mother to not have to justify her decision about getting a divorce, because it's not a morality play. It's the relationship was a human construct, and that human construct is not working for me. And my recognition of that is that I'm now terminating that relationship. So now if it comes out, I also don't think that one needs to be either defensive or promoting of the idea. But it just is what it is, because even his infidelity, is that really purely a moral thing? Well, for some people, that's all it is. But I would argue that there's probably something broken in him that can't find intimacy satisfying. Or perhaps, and this is going to be dangerous for the woman who wrote the question in, which I do appreciate, by the way, but to admit that the marriage may have lasted a long time, but perhaps it was never truly a mutually satisfying relationship. And maybe both of us have a part in that. So in the post-marriage debriefing, to be able to acknowledge that, yes, we were married. I never had an affair. He had a ton of affairs, or my partner had a ton of affairs. But that doesn't mean that I'm the saint and that they're the sinner. And that's my point I'm trying to get across here is when we present it all in terms of morality, there's very little understanding. And without genuine understanding, there can be very little work to take countermeasures and prevent this from happening again, whether it's for ourselves or for our children.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Steve. And I'd like to send you all off with a message of gratitude for your ears. And we hope that this information has helped you in one way or another to have a happier life, I guess.
Well, I feel the same way. I really want, people to know I feel honored to share this time with them. And I think it's really not so much about what I say, but the way of thinking about romance, love, and sexuality that's important, to simply be thinking about it and reflecting on it rather than just being, superficial and just reacting out of, emotion. I think it's fantastic to share company and time with people who are like-minded in that way.
Definitely. So cool. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.